Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back through the mists of time, way back to an era where heroes weren't wearing capes, but bronze armor, and their superpowers were less flying and more really good at stabbing things. We're going to settle in and explore how cunning tricks and massive walls shaped the ancient world, leading to falls that echoed through history. Imagine the soft flicker of an oil lamp, the scent of ancient dust in the air, maybe the distant bleating of a sheep, or the clank of metal on stone. You're there under that vast, star-dusted sky. Just a heads up, if you were actually there, your chances of making it through the night wouldn't be great. But don't worry, we're safe here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're feeling brave, drop your location and time zone in the comments. It's wild to think about where everyone is listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. All right, breathe in and let that air take you back. You find yourself squinting against the relentless Anatolian sun, the kind that bakes the earth and makes the air shimmer. You're not lounging on a beach. No, you're one of the Achaean soldiers, sometimes called Greeks, hunkered down in a dusty, sprawling camp that smells faintly of sweat, sour wine, and disappointment. For a solid 10 years, you've been here staring up at the imposing, sun-baked walls of Troy. 10 years. Think about that. A decade of your life. That's longer than most streaming services have been around. Longer than some of the cars on the road today have been running. And definitely longer than your average relationship on reality TV. You left home, a relatively young person, maybe with dreams of quick glory and plunder, and now you're just tired. Your armor is dented. Your sandals are worn thin. And you've probably forgotten what it feels like to sleep in a proper bed that isn't a thin mat on the hard ground. The city of Troy itself sits there taunting you, perched on a hill that seems to sigh under the weight of time. Its walls look utterly insurmountable from down here. High, thick, made of massive stones, fitted together with stubborn precision. You've seen your comrades try. You've tried yourself to climb those walls to break through the gates. Arrows rain down from above, spears thrust through battlements, and whenever you get close, there's Hector, Prince of Troy, a warrior whose skill makes your stomach clench, leading the defense. It's a stalemate, pure and simple. The Trojans can't drive you away completely. You control the surrounding land, you raid nearby settlements for supplies, which, let's be honest, is a grim necessity at this point, not thrilling adventure. But you can't get inside the city either. They have their farms and resources within or very close by. And those walls are their perfect silent guardians. You sometimes look out at the Aegean Sea, where your 1,000+ ships are beached rotting slightly in the salt air. Yes, over 1,000 ships. Imagine the logistical nightmare of getting that many vessels and the tens of thousands of men they carried across the sea, supplying them for 10 years. Modern navies struggle with coordinating a handful of destroyers for a few months. This was epic-level mobilization, perhaps slightly exaggerated in the legends, but still a massive undertaking. You came with legendary figures, the King of Kings, Agamemnon, brooding Achilles when he wasn't sulking in his tent, bless his dramatic soul-wise old Nestor, mighty Ajax, and of course, the wily Odysseus. These names are whispered around the campfires sometimes with reverence, sometimes with exasperation, because even with these heroes, you're still here, stuck. The war started supposedly because Paris of Troy ran off with Helen, the wife of Agamemnon's brother, Menelaus. A face that launched 1,000 ships, they say. You, on the other hand, are just a grunt whose face is launching 1,000 sighs of boredom. You signed up for glory, maybe some treasure, definitely not for a decade of sand in your teeth and the constant threat of a Trojan spear. The initial fire and fury have long since settled into a weary routine. You patrol, you train, you try to avoid dysentery, and you stare at those walls day after day, year after year. There's a deep, nagging feeling in the pit of your stomach that this isn't going to end with a straightforward charge. The Trojans are brave, their city is strong, and the gods frankly seem a bit too entertained by the whole drawn-out mess. You need something different, something unexpected. The sheer scale of this war, as described in the ancient poems like Homer's Iliad, is staggering. It paints a picture of nearly every major Greek kingdom contributing ships and men. Whether this level of unity and prolonged conflict actually happened exactly as told is, well, let's just say historians still argue whether the Trojan War, as described in the epics, was a single historical event or a composite of many conflicts over centuries. There's archaeological evidence of a city in modern-day Turkey that looks a lot like Troy, showing signs of destruction around the right time period. But connecting the myths to the dirt is a complex puzzle. Did Achilles really exist? Was Helen that beautiful? You don't really care about the academic debates right now. You just care about getting home. You've seen various attempts to break the deadlock, failed assaults on the walls, desperate duels between champions, even attempted night raids that ended with more Achaean bodies outside the gates. Morale is low. It's a miracle Agamemnon is still in charge, though there are whispers of discontent. You've been here so long, you know the names of the Trojan sentries who patrol a specific section of the wall just by their silhouettes against the dawn sky. You've developed a grudging respect for their resilience even as you plot their downfall. This isn't just a war anymore. It's become a way of life, albeit a miserable one. And the only thing worse than being stuck in a 10-year siege is the dawning realization that nobody seems to have a genuinely good idea how to end it. The conventional methods have failed spectacularly. Something unconventional is needed. Something clever. Something tricky. Your mind dulled by years of routine and meager rations can barely conceive of what that might be. But you can feel the shift in the camp's mood. The leaders are meeting more often. There's a buzz, a different kind of tension. Not the tension of impending battle, but the tension of anticipation. They're cooking up something. Let's just hope it's better than the plan to sacrifice Agamemnon's daughter, which didn't exactly fill you with confidence. Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back through the mists of time, way back to an era where heroes weren't wearing capes, but bronze armor, and their superpowers were less flying and more really good at stabbing things. We're going to settle in and explore how cunning tricks and massive walls shaped the ancient world, leading to falls that echoed through history. Imagine the soft flicker of an oil lamp, the scent of ancient dust in the air, maybe the distant bleating of a sheep, or the clank of metal on stone. You're there under that vast star-dusted sky. Just a heads up, if you were actually there, your chances of making it through the night wouldn't be great. But don't worry, we're safe here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're feeling brave, drop your location and time zone in the comments. It's wild to think about where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. All right, breathe in and let that air take you back. You find yourself squinting against the relentless Anatolian sun, the kind that bakes the earth and makes the air shimmer. You're not lounging on a beach. No, you're one of the Achaean soldiers, sometimes called Greeks, hunkered down in a dusty, sprawling camp that smells faintly of sweat-sour wine and disappointment. For a solid 10 years, you've been here staring up at the imposing sun-baked walls of Troy. 10 years. Think about that. A decade of your life. That's longer than most streaming services have been around. Longer than some of the cars on the road today have been running. And definitely longer than your average relationship on reality TV. You left home, a relatively young person, maybe with dreams of quick glory and plunder. And now you're just tired. Your armor is dented, your sandals are worn thin, and you've probably forgotten what it feels like to sleep in a proper bed that isn't a thin mat on the hard ground. The city of Troy itself sits there taunting you, perched on a hill that seems to sigh under the weight of time. Its walls look utterly insurmountable from down here. High, thick, made of massive stones, fitted together with stubborn precision. You've seen your comrades try. You've tried yourself to climb those walls, to break through the gates. Arrows rain down from above, spears thrust through battlements, and whenever you get close, there's Hector, Prince of Troy, a warrior whose skill makes your stomach clench, leading the defense. It's a stalemate, pure and simple. The Trojans can't drive you away completely. You control the surrounding land, you raid nearby settlements for supplies, which, let's be honest, is a grim necessity at this point, not thrilling adventure. But you can't get inside the city either. They have their farms and resources within, or very close by, and those walls are their perfect silent guardians. You sometimes look out at the Aegean Sea, where your 1,000+ ships are beached, rotting slightly in the salt air. Yes, over 1,000 ships. Imagine the logistical nightmare of getting that many vessels and the tens of thousands of men they carried across the sea, supplying them for 10 years. Modern navies struggle with coordinating a handful of destroyers for a few months. This was epic-level mobilization, perhaps slightly exaggerated in the legends, but still a massive undertaking. You came with legendary figures. The King of Kings, Agamemnon brooding Achilles, when he wasn't sulking in his tent, bless his dramatic soul. Wise old Nestor, mighty Ajax, and of course the wily Odysseus. These names are whispered around the campfires sometimes with reverence, sometimes with exasperation. Because even with these heroes, you're still here, stuck. The war started supposedly because Paris of Troy ran off with Helen, the wife of Agamemnon's brother Menelaus. A face that launched 1,000 ships, they say. You, on the other hand, are just a grunt whose face is launching 1,000 sighs of boredom. You signed up for glory, maybe some treasure, definitely not for a decade of sand in your teeth and the constant threat of a Trojan spear. The initial fire and fury have long since settled into a weary routine. You patrol, you train, you try to avoid dysentery, and you stare at those walls day after day, year after year. There's a deep, nagging feeling in the pit of your stomach that this isn't going to end with a straightforward charge. The Trojans are brave. Their city is strong. and the gods frankly seem a bit too entertained by the whole drawn-out mess. You need something different, something unexpected. The sheer scale of this war, as described in the ancient poems, like Homer's Iliad, is staggering. It paints a picture of nearly every major Greek kingdom contributing ships and men. Whether this level of unity and prolonged conflict actually happened exactly as told is, well, let's just say historians still argue whether the Trojan War, as described in the epics, was a single historical event or a composite of many conflicts over centuries. There's archaeological evidence of a city in modern-day Turkey that looks a lot like Troy, showing signs of destruction around the right time period. But connecting the myths to the dirt is a complex puzzle. Did Achilles really exist? Was Helen that beautiful? You don't really care about the academic debates right now. You just care about getting home. You've seen various attempts to break the deadlock. Failed assaults on the walls, desperate duels between champions, even attempted night raids that ended with more Achaean bodies outside the gates. Morale is low. It's a miracle Agamemnon is still in charge, though there are whispers of discontent. You've been here so long, you know the names of the Trojan sentries who patrol a specific section of the wall just by their silhouettes against the dawn sky. You've developed a grudging respect for their resilience, even as you plot their downfall. This isn't just a war anymore. It's become a way of life, albeit a miserable one. And the only thing worse than being stuck in a 10-year siege is the dawning realization that nobody seems to have a genuinely good idea how to end it. The conventional methods have failed spectacularly. Something unconventional is needed. Something clever. Something tricky. Your mind, dulled by years of routine and meager rations, can barely conceive of what that might be, but you can feel the shift in the camp's mood. The leaders are meeting more often. There's a buzz, a different kind of tension. Not the tension of impending battle, but the tension of anticipation. They're cooking up something. Let's just hope it's better than the plan to sacrifice Agamemnon's daughter, which didn't exactly fill you with confidence. The air in the Achaean camp, usually thick with the dust of routine and the smell of 10 years of waiting, suddenly buzzes with a different kind of activity. The rumor wasn't just talk. The crazy plan is actually happening. Orders come down the line. Certain units are detailed for what seems like a massive logging operation. You see groups heading off towards the slopes of nearby Mount Ida, known for its forest's axes slung over shoulders. Getting huge timbers down from a mountain without modern machinery. Yeah, that's exactly as fun as it sounds. Lots of heaving, sweating, and probably a few close calls with rolling logs. But there's a purpose to it. A strange, almost frantic energy replacing the usual siege weariness. A secluded spot is chosen hidden from the view of the Trojan lookouts on the city walls, or the watchtowers along the coast. Maybe a small hidden cove, or a fold in the hills a little distance away. Here, away from prying eyes, the real work begins. Epeius, the master craftsman, is in charge, probably looking overwhelmed, but also intensely focused. He's got a crew of the best carpenters and builders among the troops, and they set to work under strict secrecy. Sawing, hammering, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of mallets on wood fills the air in this hidden workshop. You might catch glimpses of the construction site if you're on certain patrols, or perhaps you hear descriptions filtering back to the main camp. It's bigger than anyone imagined, a colossal framework taking shape, unmistakably equine. The scale of it is daunting. It has to be large enough to be an impressive offering to a goddess, something the Trojans would see as a significant, even provocative item. But crucially, it has to be hollow with trapdoors, an internal bracing capable of holding a significant number of armed men without collapsing or giving away its secret. Imagine building something this complex and massive with basic tools, while also trying to keep it completely under wraps. It's the original "Do Not Disturb" sign on a national scale. While the construction is underway, another even more tense process begins: the selection of the warriors who will go inside the horse. This isn't a mission for the faint of heart or for anyone who gets claustrophobic easily. You'll be crammed in a dark, stuffy space, completely silent for hours, relying entirely on the deception holding. One cough, one dropped sword, one nervous fidget at the wrong moment, and the whole plan goes belly up, likely with you and everyone else inside being unceremoniously skewered. Volunteering for this is essentially volunteering for a high-stakes, low-comfort suicide mission. The call goes out for the bravest and most disciplined men. Naturally, the big names step forward: Odysseus himself, who conceived the plan, King Menelaus, Helen's husband, who probably has a special kind of motivation, Diomedes, Ajax the Lesser, and others known for their courage and reliability. They needed men who could endure extreme discomfort and silence men who wouldn't crack under pressure, men who were absolutely committed to seeing this through. It's a roll call of Achaean heroes, and you watch perhaps with a mix of awe and terror as these legendary figures agree to crawl into a wooden box. The sheer number of warriors chosen varies in different tellings. Historians still argue whether the traditional number of warriors hidden inside the horse, sometimes cited as 30, sometimes closer to 50, is an accurate reflection of what would have been feasible or necessary. Whatever the exact number, it's a significant force, the elite of the elite. As the horse nears completion, painted and perhaps even given realistic-looking features, presumably they didn't want it to look like a rush job. Even though it was, the atmosphere becomes incredibly tense. You see the chosen warriors preparing separately, going over the plan one last time, saying quiet goodbyes to comrades. They are packing minimal gear. Weapons, maybe a water skin, but nothing that could rattle or give them away. The air around them is heavy with the weight of what they are about to attempt. It's a moment of profound courage, or perhaps profound desperation, depending on how you look at it. Meanwhile, back at the main camp, the rest of the army is starting the very visible process of packing up. Tents are coming down. Supplies are being loaded onto the ships. You're instructed to make a show of it to look like you're genuinely leaving. No lingering glances towards the city, no obvious signs that this is anything other than a defeated army finally retreating. It's a performance for the benefit of the Trojan lookouts. See, we're leaving nothing to see here, just a giant wooden horse we conveniently forgot. It's hard to believe it will work. It feels less like a military strategy and more like an elaborate piece of theater where the stakes are literally life and death for everyone involved. The construction finishes. The trapdoors are ready. The chosen few are steeling themselves for the longest, quietest hours of their lives. The wooden horse stands ready, a silent, massive symbol of the Achaean gamble. The morning after the Achaean camp falls silent feels surreal. You, a Trojan civilian or soldier, peer cautiously from atop the mighty walls you've guarded for a decade. Down below, where the enemy camp sprawled for 10 long years, there's nothing. Just empty space littered with the detritus of thousands of men's lives. Broken pottery, discarded armor bits, the outlines of vanished tents, and the ships gone. The vast, intimidating fleet that lined the shore for as long as you can remember has vanished over the horizon. Is it possible? Are they actually gone? Hesitantly, nervously, the great scene gate is open. For the first time in a decade, you step out onto the plain of Troy. The feeling is exhilarating, terrifying. The air smells different without the constant low hum of the enemy army. You walk through the deserted camp, a strange mix of relief and disbelief washing over you. It's over. You survived. Your city is safe. The joy is palpable, spreading like wildfire through the people venturing out. But then you see it. Standing alone on the plain, not far from where the main Achaean camp was, is a colossal, silent shape. It's made of wood. It's a horse. A giant, impossibly large wooden horse standing there like an enormous, slightly awkward monument. What in the name of the gods is that curiosity quickly replaces pure relief? People gather around it, marveling at its size and craftsmanship. Whispers turn into shouts. What is its purpose? Why would the Greeks leave this behind? A heated debate quickly erupts. The city leaders, King Priam among them, gather near the strange structure. Some argue it's a gift, perhaps an offering to appease the gods after such a long, brutal war, or maybe even a tribute to Troy's resilience. After all, the Greeks gave up and left right. This must be a sign of their surrender, a monument to Troy's victory. The idea of pulling this magnificent, albeit weird trophy into the city is appealing. Imagine the symbol of your triumph standing within your walls. But others are suspicious. 10 years of war breed caution. How could the Greeks just give up? Why leave this? Among the voices of doubt is Cassandra, daughter of Priam. Poor Cassandra. Blessed by Apollo with the gift of prophecy, then cursed by him so that her true prophecies are never believed. She rushes forward, her eyes wide with terror, screaming that the horse is full of armed men, that it will be the city's doom. But she's always prophesying disaster. People just sigh and gently guide her away, shaking their heads. There goes Cassandra again, predicting the end of the world, they mutter. It's genuinely one of the most frustrating divine curses you could imagine, like being permanently stuck in a meeting where you have the correct answer, but nobody listens to you. Then there's Laocoon, a respected priest of Poseidon, or sometimes Apollo, depending on the version of the story you hear. He's perhaps the most vocal and logical of the doubters. He argues vehemently against bringing the horse inside. He suspects a trick, a snare, hidden within this seemingly innocent offering. He utters the famous warning words that should echo through eternity. Equo ne credite, teucri quid, id estimeo, danaos, et dona ferentes. Meschio. Which translates roughly to, do not trust the horse Trojans. Whatever it is, I fear the Greeks, even when they bring gifts. To drive home his point, he even hurls a spear at the side of the wooden beast. The spear sticks, and some say a hollow sound, or even a faint groan came from within. A sound that the men inside must have heard, their hearts likely stopping in their chests. Just as Laocoon's powerful warning gives the people pause, a terrifying sign from the gods occurs. As Laocoon stands there, potentially swaying public opinion, 2 enormous sea serpents emerge from the waves and slither onto the shore. They make directly for Laocoon and his 2 sons, who are standing nearby. In a horrific spectacle, the serpents attack, coiling around them, crushing and biting them until they are dead. The Trojans watching are stunned, horrified. They immediately interpret this as divine punishment. Laocoon was struck down because he dared to defile a sacred offering to Athena by attacking the horse. This must mean the horse is truly sacred and meant for the city. Historians still argue whether the mythological elements like the sea serpents attacking Laocoon were purely symbolic of divine will, or perhaps a mythical interpretation of a more natural or political event obscured by time. But for the Trojans that day, the message was clear and terrifying. Disrespect the horse, and you incur the wrath of the gods. Adding another layer to the deception is the appearance of Sinon, the Greek left behind. He's found near the horse, seemingly abandoned. He's brought before Priam, weeping, and claiming to be a victim of Odysseus's malice. He spins a convincing tale the Greeks were desperate to go home, the gods were angry at them for something he invents a reason, and the prophet Calchas demanded a human sacrifice to ensure safe passage home. Sinon claims he was chosen, but he escaped the altar and hid while the others sailed away. He then explains the horse. It's an offering to Athena to atone for stealing her sacred statue, the Palladium, from Troy earlier in the war. He insists it was built so large precisely so the Trojans couldn't bring it into the city, because if they did, Troy would become invincible, turning Athena's favor against the Greeks. If they harmed it, it would bring ruin. Between the divine omen of the serpents and Sinon's cunningly constructed lie, the Trojans' doubts are overcome. Relief, hubris piety, and fear of divine retribution combine to seal their fate. Despite Cassandra's frantic, unheard cries and Laocoon's brutally silenced warning, the decision is made. The magnificent, dangerous wooden horse will be brought inside the walls of Troy. So against all the sensible warnings, blinded by relief, and convinced they were acting out of piety, the Trojans decide to bring the giant wooden horse inside their city walls. This is where the real physical effort begins. The horse is massive, far too big to fit through the main gates easily. You watch, or perhaps you're involved as the Trojans get to work. They have to partially dismantle a section of their own formidable walls, or perhaps enlarge a gate to haul the behemoth through. Imagine the effort. Ropes are attached, rollers are placed, and with much straining and heaving, the colossal wooden beast is slowly, painstakingly dragged across the plain and maneuvered into the heart of Troy. It's a monumental task, a perverse community effort to bring doom upon themselves. Historians still argue whether the Trojans had to partially dismantle their own formidable walls to bring the horse inside, or if they used a gate specially built for large items. The sheer logistical challenge highlights just how determined they were to possess this gift. Once inside the walls, the horse is placed somewhere prominent, perhaps near the Temple of Athena or in the city square. The atmosphere shifts from cautious curiosity to outright celebration. The Greeks are gone. The war is over. 10 years of fear and deprivation are finally at an end. The Trojans throw open their city light bonfires, bring out wine and food. A massive feast begins. People dance in the streets, sing songs of victory, and embrace loved ones they feared they would never see again. The city is alive with relief and joy. Meanwhile, tucked away inside the dark, cramped belly of the wooden horse, the chosen Achaean warriors are enduring an entirely different experience. Imagine being in there. It's pitch black, probably smells strongly of fresh-cut wood and nervous sweat. Every tiny creak of the wood as the horse is moved must sound deafening. They can hear the muffled sounds of the Trojan celebration outside, the distant shouts, the music, the laughter. It must have been an agonizing weight crammed together with 30 or so other heavily armed men trying not to make a sound, not to cough, not to accidentally clank against a shield or sword. The tension in that confined space must have been thicker than Homeric mead. It's the ultimate test of discipline, a bizarre, uncomfortable stakeout. You couldn't pay me enough to be in there. As the night wears on, the sounds of celebration outside begin to fade. The feasting Trojans, exhausted from 10 years of siege and the day's excitement and likely quite a bit of wine, gradually fall asleep. The city grows quiet. The moment has arrived. From the darkness inside the horse, a faint light is spotted by those keeping watch on the island of Tenedos. The signal from Sinon, who has presumably slipped away or been left to make his way back. The departed Achaean fleet, which had only sailed as far as the nearby island, turns around. Silently under the cloak of the moonless night, they row back towards the Trojan shore. Inside the horse, Odysseus gives the signal. A trapdoor, perhaps cleverly concealed on the horse's belly or side, is carefully opened. One by one, or perhaps a few at a time, the warriors emerge from their wooden prison. They drop silently to the ground. Their mission is clear and urgent. Locate the city guards, neutralize them quickly and quietly, and most importantly, open the main gates. They move like shadows through the sleeping city, their hearts pounding, the sounds of their own footsteps seeming deafening in the stillness. They reach the gates, overpower the few drowsy guards who probably weren't expecting visitors, let alone visitors who arrived via giant wooden animal, and unbar the massive doors. The signal is given to the waiting fleet. Out on the plain, the main Achaean army, who had rowed ashore under darkness, surges forward. They pour through the open gates into the sleeping city. The shock and chaos are immediate. The Trojans are caught completely by surprise. One moment, they are dreaming of peace. The next, their city is filled with armed enemies. You wake to the sounds of shouting, the clash of bronze, the screams of terror. The well-guarded, proud city that resisted attack for a decade falls in a single horrifying night. The Greeks, fueled by 10 years of frustration and the element of surprise, show no mercy. Buildings are torched, temples are looted, and the people are slaughtered or enslaved. King Priam is killed at the altar. Heroes like Hector are already dead, but their families suffer terrible fates. The once impenetrable walls stand witness to the city's final agony. The trick, the crazy, audacious wooden horse, worked. Troy, the city that could not be taken by force, was conquered by deception and its own fatal embrace of a seemingly harmless gift. The age of heroes and their epic wars is drawing to a close, and the memory of Troy's fall will linger, a stark lesson in the dangers of pride and trusting your enemies. The decision is made. The arguments of Cassandra and Laocoon, though tragically accurate, are dismissed in the face of collective relief, Sinon's cunning lies, and what the Trojans perceive as a clear sign from the gods. The giant wooden horse will be brought into Troy. You, a Trojan, might feel a mix of apprehension and a surging tide of patriotic triumph. After all these years of being cooped up, of watching the enemy camp from behind stone walls, you are finally bringing their last strange remnant inside your city. It feels like the ultimate victory lap. But victory requires effort. Getting a multi-story, oddly shaped wooden statue through ancient city gates is no easy feat. You join the crowds gathering near the scene gate. Ropes, thick and sturdy, are brought out. Rollers made from smooth tree trunks are placed under the horse's massive base. It's a Herculean task, requiring the strength of hundreds, maybe even thousands of Trojans, pulling and pushing together. It's probably chaos. People shouting instructions, ropes straining the ground, groaning under the weight. It's less like a solemn procession and more like trying to parallel park a bus made of solid oak. The main gates aren't wide enough. Even the largest entrance, perhaps used for bringing in siege engines or trading caravans in peacetime, wasn't built for a horse this immense. This is where the true extent of their fatal commitment becomes clear. The Trojans have to make a choice, leave the horse outside, or alter their defenses to bring it in. They choose the latter. You witness as masons and laborers, perhaps the same ones who helped build and maintain these very walls, start carefully, deliberately dismantling a section of their own protection. Stones that have withstood battering rams and siege towers for a decade are pried loose, creating a gap wide enough for the wooden giant to pass through. It's a staggering visual, a city famous for its walls willingly breaching them. Historians still argue whether the Trojans had to partially dismantle their own formidable walls to bring the horse inside, or if a specific very large gate existed that is now lost to archaeology. But the legend emphasizes the act of making a passage. Slowly, painstakingly, the horse is pulled and rolled forward. Inch by inch, it moves from the blood-soaked plain over the threshold and into the bustling, now rejoicing streets of Troy. The air is filled with shouts of triumph, laughter, the rhythmic chants of the men pulling the ropes. Children run ahead, marveling at the scale of the thing. It's a parade, a celebration of endurance and survival. As the last part of the horse clears the opening and enters the city proper, a wave of relief and excitement washes over the crowd. It's inside. The symbol of their victory, their divine offering, is now within their grasp. The wooden horse is maneuvered to its chosen spot, perhaps a public square or near a temple. It stands there, a silent, imposing figure, surrounded by the happy chaos of a city finally free from siege. People touch its wooden flanks, admire its craftsmanship, already planning how it will be incorporated into their city's landscape. They probably don't notice the faint, almost imperceptible sounds from within. The tiny shift of weight, a muffled breath held too long, the tense stillness of the warriors hidden inside listening to the sounds of their unsuspecting victims celebrating their own impending doom. The sun begins its descent towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. The work of moving the horse is done. The breach in the wall is perhaps left open, or perhaps they begin the perfunctory work of closing it, confident the danger is past. The city is preparing for a night of unprecedented celebration. Wine flows freely, banquets are laid out, music starts playing. For the first time in 10 years, the people of Troy can relax, truly relax, and revel in their hard-won peace. They have brought the war's end inside their gates, not realizing they have just invited the war itself, in its most concentrated and deadly form, into the very heart of their home. The trap is set. Inside the walls of Troy, the atmosphere is electric. The massive wooden horse stands silently in the square, a strange centerpiece to a city erupting in celebration. After 10 long years, the siege is over. The enemy is gone. The relief is immense, washing over the population like a tidal wave. You join the throngs of people spilling into the streets. Tables are set up, food is brought out from storerooms that haven't been raided or burnt in a decade, and wine flows like water. This isn't just a party, it's the release of 10 years of pent-up fear, anxiety, and hardship. Music fills the air, lyres, flutes, singing laughter. People who haven't genuinely smiled in years are beaming. Families are reunited, neighbors embrace, everyone shares stories of survival, and the sheer disbelief that it's actually over. The air smells of roasted meat, spilled wine, and the sweet, potent perfume of freedom. Imagine the sheer volume of wine consumed. After a decade of potential rationing, or limited supplies, having access to cellars again must have felt like hitting the jackpot. You probably saw people drinking straight from the amphorae by the end of the night. Ancient hangovers. Let's just say they were legendary even before this particular night. This revelry goes on for hours. The Trojans are exhausted from the war, yes, but the adrenaline of victory and relief is a powerful stimulant. They dance, they sing, they offer thanks to the gods, who they believe finally favored them. The fact that they brought the sacred horse inside seems to confirm their righteousness and divine protection. They feel secure, invincible again within their walls, especially with the symbol of their triumph now standing among them. But while the party rages outside, inside the hollow structure of the wooden horse, a different kind of experience is unfolding. Crammed into the dark, airless space, the elite Achaean warriors, Odysseus, Menelaus, and the others, listen to the sounds of the celebration. Every laugh, every song, every clinking cup must be a test of their nerves. They have to remain absolutely silent, absolutely still. Imagine trying to suppress a cough, an itch, or the urge to shift your weight when you've been in the same cramped position for hours. The sounds of revelry so joyous to the Trojans must sound like a mocking, terrifying countdown to the men inside. They are surrounded by their enemy, completely vulnerable, relying entirely on the fragile shield of deception. It's the ultimate in awkward group projects, except instead of failing, a grade failure means a swift and unpleasant end. Outside the city, on the dark sea, the main Achaean army is waiting. They haven't gone home, of course. They've merely sailed to a nearby island, Tenedos, just out of sight of the Trojan watchtowers. They've beached their ships, quieted their camp, and now they wait in the darkness, scanning the distant shore of Troy. Their wait is filled with a different kind of tension than the one inside the horse. It's the tension of anticipation of a predator waiting for the signal to strike. They, too, have endured 10 years of hardship, and the thought of finally ending it, of finally breaching those walls, must be consuming them. And somewhere, either hiding near the city or making his way back to the coast after giving his performance, is Sinon, the sole visible piece of the deception left behind. His job is done, the lie was believed. Now he waits for the moment to signal the fleet. According to the myths, this signal was a fire or a lamp lit from a prominent spot, like the tomb of Achilles or a high tower. Historians still argue whether the signal was a fire, a lamp, or something else entirely, and its exact timing. But the core idea remains a prearranged sign telling the waiting Greeks that it was time to return. As the hours pass, the energy of the Trojan feast begins to wane. The music grows fainter, the laughter subsides. One by one, the revelers, utterly exhausted and full of food and wine, stumble to their homes and fall into a deep, contented sleep. The city that was so vibrant with celebration an hour before becomes quiet, peaceful, utterly vulnerable. The only sound might be the gentle night breeze or the soft lapping of waves on the shore, sounds that carry no threat to the sleeping Trojans. But out on the water, dark shapes are moving. The ships are returning, The silent night outside stands in stark contrast to the now silent city within. The stage is set for the final act of the Trojan War. Inside the belly of the wooden horse, the sounds from the city have gradually died down. The raucous celebration has faded into the quiet breathing of a sleeping population. The warriors packed inside are still listening. The air is thick and stale, the darkness absolute. Hours have stretched into an eternity. Every creak of the wood, every distant night sound is amplified in their tense awareness. They've been in here so long, they probably know every knot and grain pattern in the wood surrounding them by feel alone. The psychological strain of waiting, of being utterly passive while surrounded by their enemy, is immense. You can almost feel their muscles trembling with suppressed energy. Then a sign. Maybe a faint light, seen through a crack, or a prearranged tapping sound. The signal from Sinon, or perhaps a cue from Odysseus. The moment has come. The tension snaps, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Odysseus, always the one in control, quietly gives the order. The warriors prepare to emerge. A section of the horse shifts. There are different accounts of exactly how they got out. Some say a trapdoor in the belly opened. Others suggest ropes were lowered from a hatch near the top. Historians still argue whether the method of descent from the horse involved ropes or some internal structure, or even just a simple ramp from a hidden opening. Whatever the mechanism, it's done as silently as possible. You can imagine the careful, deliberate movements, the muffled sounds of men easing themselves out of the cramped space and down onto the ground. The first breath of cool night air outside the horse must feel incredible after hours of confinement. Stealth is everything now. Moving like wraiths, the warriors spread out through the sleeping city. They know the layout from 10 years of observation from captured prisoners and from Sinon's intelligence. Their immediate objectives are the city gates and the main guard posts. Any Trojan sentries they encounter are dealt with swiftly and silently. A muffled struggle, a quiet final gasp. There's no time for hesitation or mercy. The fate of their entire army waiting outside depends on them opening those gates. They reach the Scene Gate, the massive entrance through which the horse itself was so recently dragged. The guards on duty, if any, are even awake after the day's feasting, are quickly overwhelmed. The heavy bars, the locks, the mechanisms that have kept the Greeks out for a decade are painstakingly, urgently undone. The great gates swing open, or perhaps the section of wall that was breached to bring the horse in is now the entry point. Outside on the dark plain, the waiting Greek army sees the signal, the open gates. The silence of the night is broken by the quiet rumble of thousands of men beginning to move. They surge forward, a tide of bronze and fury pouring into the unsuspecting city. After 10 years of being locked out, they are finally in. If you are a Trojan, you wake not gradually, but violently. The sounds that pierce your sleep are not the familiar noises of your city, but shouts of panic, the clang of weapons, the roar of fire. You stumble out of your house into a nightmare. Your streets are filled with enemy soldiers. The air is thick with smoke. Buildings are already ablaze, casting flickering, terrifying shadows. The celebrations of hours before seem like a distant, cruel dream. There is no time to organize, no time to defend. The surprise is absolute, the chaos complete. The fighting is brutal and swift. The Greeks, with the advantage of surprise and 10 years of pent-up aggression, sweep through the city. Temples are desecrated. Homes are invaded. The royal palace, the last bastion of Trojan power, is attacked. King Priam, the venerable ruler, is killed at the altar of Zeus, a tragic end to a long reign. Though Hector, the city's greatest defender, is already dead, his family faces the grim consequences of defeat. The proud city of Troy, which withstood 10 years of conventional warfare, is destroyed in a single night by a trick. It's a stark, brutal lesson in the power of deception over brute force and the catastrophic price of believing what you desperately want to believe. The fires burn throughout the night. By dawn, Troy is a smoldering ruin, its walls breached not by force from without, but by cunning from within. The age of heroes is ending in fire and tragedy. The tales of this night will be sung for centuries, a legendary fall that marks a transition in the ancient world. The power shifts, empires rise and fall, and the memory of a city brought down by a wooden horse becomes a cautionary tale whispered across the generations. But life moves on, and from the ashes of legendary conflict, new powers will rise, building their own empires, facing their own challenges, their own eventual falls. The story of Troy is over, but the patterns of history, of tricks and falls and forgotten glory, are just beginning to unfold. Okay, let's float forward a bit in time now. Leave behind the smoking ruins of Troy, the echoes of that final terrible night. The age of legendary heroes of gods, mingling freely with mortals on battlefields, is fading into myth. We're skipping ahead a few centuries, maybe even 1,000 years, depending on how you date things, and we're drifting westward across the same sea the Achaeans sailed, but landing on a different peninsula, Italy. The focus shifts from the eastern Aegean to the central Mediterranean, where a new power is beginning its incredibly long and complicated journey towards dominance. Imagine a collection of muddy hills next to a river, the Tiber, not the most impressive river, but a decent one. On these hills, a small settlement starts to grow. Nothing glamorous, not like the Bronze Age palaces you might picture. Think huts, maybe some basic fortifications, made of earth and wood. This is Rome, in its very, very early days. According to the most famous legend, it was founded by twin brothers Romulus and Remus, who were supposedly abandoned as infants, raised by a she-wolf. Yes, a she-wolf. You heard that right. Talk about an unconventional upbringing, and later quarreled with Romulus, ending up as the sole founder. It's a dramatic origin story involving divine parentage betrayal and, surprisingly, maternal canines. Definitely more interesting than a city council meeting deciding on zoning laws. From these humble, slightly weird beginnings, Rome starts to grow. It's not an overnight explosion like some mythical cities. It's a slow, steady, often brutal process. They fight with their neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, various Latin tribes in the surrounding area, mountain peoples like the Samnites, and they start winning. But Rome's genius isn't just in winning battles. It's in what they do after winning. Instead of just destroying their enemies, like say what happened to Troy, the Romans often incorporated them. They offered forms of citizenship, made treaties, demanded soldiers for their army. They built roads, those famous Roman roads, connecting conquered territories back to the city, making communication and troop movement fast and efficient. This pragmatic approach is a mainstream historical fact about their success. They absorbed people and resources, growing stronger with every conflict. They weren't just fighters. They were incredibly organized. They developed a sophisticated legal system, a complex government that evolved from a monarchy into a republic, which in theory at least involved citizens having a say. though like most historical republics, it was a bit more complicated in practice, often dominated by powerful families. You learned early on, if you were living in Rome, follow the rules, contribute to the state, and you were part of something bigger. Step out of line, and Roman justice, swift and often harsh, would remind you why that wasn't a good idea. Rome spent centuries expanding its power across the Italian peninsula. They defeated the Greeks living in southern Italy, who were used to dealing with smaller city-states, and found Rome's relentless military machine a completely different challenge. By the 3rd century, BC Rome controlled most of Italy. But the Mediterranean world was large, and another great power existed to the south across the sea in North Africa, Carthage. A wealthy maritime empire with a formidable navy. The clash between Rome and Carthage was inevitable. This led to the Punic Wars, a series of massive, drawn-out conflicts. Imagine warfare on a scale far beyond the Trojan War, involving huge fleets of ships and massive armies clashing across decades. This was Rome's first real test on the global stage. They had to learn to fight at sea to face legendary generals like Hannibal, who famously marched elephants over the Alps, a whole other story for another time maybe. Rome eventually won though, at immense cost, securing control of strategic islands like Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, and eventually destroying Carthage itself. This victory cemented Rome as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. From there, the expansion continued almost like a snowball rolling downhill, eastward into Greece, bringing them into contact with the heirs of Alexander the Great's empire, the very lands where the Trojan War legends were sung. Northward into Gaul, modern France, westward into Spain. By the time Rome transitions from a republic to an empire under Augustus, it controls a vast territory stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. It is a superpower, the likes of which the world hasn't truly seen before. A city that started as a few huts on hills, whose founders were supposedly suckled by a wolf, now rules the Mediterranean world. It feels invincible, eternal. But even the mightiest structures can develop cracks, and as Rome grew larger and more complex, new problems began to emerge, problems that would eventually make even this seemingly unstoppable force vulnerable. Historians still argue whether the traditional founding date and the stories of the early monarchy are historically accurate, seeing them perhaps as later legends solidifying Rome's identity. But there's no debate that from humble origins, Rome built something truly enormous. So you've seen Rome rise. From a collection of huts to the master of the Mediterranean world, an empire stretching farther than any before it. You might picture shining marble cities, legions marching in perfect formation, senators in togas debating grand philosophy. And yes, Rome had all of that. It had incredible engineers who built aqueducts that still stand today, baths that were the ancient equivalent of a spa and gym combined, and a legal system whose influence is felt even now. But ruling a vast empire is complicated, and size, it turns out, creates its own unique set of problems. Like trying to keep track of 1,000 tiny errands across 3 continents, except the errands involve armies and taxes. One of the biggest issues plaguing Rome, especially as the centuries wore on, was political instability. Being Roman emperor became arguably the most powerful job in the world, but also one of the most dangerous. Think of it like being CEO of a massive trillion-dollar company, except your board of directors includes ambitious generals, scheming senators, and your own personal bodyguards, who might decide they'd rather have a different CEO tomorrow. Emperors were frequently assassinated, overthrown by rivals, or face challenges from provincial governors declaring themselves the new boss. The 3rd century AD in particular was a rough patch, an era known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, where emperor followed emperor in rapid, often violent succession. You barely had time to learn the new guy's name and face before someone else was trying to stab him or march an army on Rome. This kind of constant upheaval made long-term planning practically impossible and weakened the central authority. Economically, the empire was a beast that needed constant feeding. Maintaining those legions, building those roads, funding the bureaucracy required vast amounts of money. This led to heavy taxation on the provinces, which wasn't always popular. Surprise, surprise. There was also rampant inflation at various times, particularly when emperors would debase the currency by putting less precious metal in coins. Imagine trying to run a budget when the value of money keeps dropping. Sounds vaguely familiar, actually. Rome also relied heavily on slave labor, which, while providing cheap muscle, may have stifled innovation. If you can just get a bunch of people to do the work for free, why bother inventing a complex machine? Then there were the social issues. The gap between the incredibly wealthy elite living in luxury in Rome and the vast majority of the population, whether poor citizens or conquered peoples, was enormous. Corruption was widespread. Being a provincial governor was often seen as a golden opportunity to get rich quick, sometimes at the expense of the locals. Integrating diverse cultures across such a vast territory was a constant challenge, leading to tensions and revolts. Some moralists of the time grumbled about the perceived decay of traditional Roman virtues, pointing to excess and indulgence in the city. Whether this was just old guys complaining about kids these days, or a genuine factor in the empire's decline, is, you guessed it, something historians still argue about. Governing this giant entity was also a nightmare of logistics. News traveled at the speed of a horse or a ship. An urgent message from a distant frontier province might take weeks or months to reach Rome. By the time the emperor heard about a problem and sent orders, the situation on the ground might have completely changed. It's like trying to manage a global corporation using only carrier pigeons and strongly worded letters. And here's a quirky little tidbit that some scholars believe played a small, insidious role in Roman health problems, particularly among the elite lead poisoning. The Romans used lead pipes extensively for their plumbing. Those impressive aqueducts brought water to the city, but lead pipes distributed it within. They also used lead acetate, known as sugar of lead, as a sweetener for wine and food. While probably not a primary cause of the empire's fall, chronic exposure to lead can cause serious health issues, including cognitive impairment and reproductive problems. So while you were enjoying your sweetened wine delivered via state-of-the-art plumbing, you might also have been slowly poisoning yourself. Cheers. All these internal cracks, the unstable government, the economic woes, the social tensions, the sheer difficulty of managing the giant, meant that the Roman Empire, for all its apparent strength, was becoming less resilient. It was like a magnificent building developing structural faults. It could still stand, it could still impress, but it was more vulnerable to external shocks. And those external shocks were definitely coming. The pressure on the borders, which had always been there, was about to increase dramatically, testing the weakened empire in ways it couldn't fully withstand. Historians still argue whether internal weaknesses or external invasions were the primary cause of the Western Roman Empire's decline. But it's clear the combination was ultimately fatal. So you've got the mighty Roman Empire, vast and powerful, but also creaking under the weight of its own internal problems. Political infighting, economic strain, social divides, and the sheer difficulty of running the show. It's like a magnificent old ship that looks unsinkable from the outside, but has some leaky seams and a crew that keeps arguing over who gets to be captain. Now imagine that ship sailing into rougher waters. The calm of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, particularly along the borders, wasn't going to last forever. Rome shared its vast borders with a whole host of different peoples. The Romans tended to lump anyone living outside their direct control into the category of barbarians. This wasn't necessarily because these people were wild and uncivilized in a jungle. It just meant they weren't. Roman didn't speak Latin or Greek in the Roman style, and didn't live in cities with aqueducts and baths. Though some certainly did. These groups were incredibly diverse. Germanic tribes like the Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Lombards, Celtic tribes, Sarmatians, Huns from the east, and many others. They lived in tribal structures, often migrating, farming, trading, and yes, sometimes raiding their neighbors, including the Romans. For centuries, the Romans managed this border situation with a mix of military force diplomacy and sometimes playing one tribe against another. They built frontier forts, stationed legions along rivers like the Rhine and Danube, and signed treaties. They even recruited soldiers from these very barbarian tribes, sometimes entire units who would serve in the Roman army. Imagine the slightly awkward dynamic. You're a Roman centurion, and half your squad are guys the propaganda posters call savage barbarians. But they're actually pretty good fighters, and you share a drink with them after drills. It's a quirky tidbit that the Roman military increasingly relied on recruiting soldiers from barbarian tribes. They were needed to fill the ranks, but their loyalty could be, shall we say, complex. As the Roman Empire entered its later centuries, particularly the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the pressure on these borders intensified dramatically. This period is often called the migration period, or, from a Roman perspective, the barbarian invasions. But historians still argue whether the movement of peoples into the Roman Empire in the later centuries was primarily an invasion driven by conquest, or a complex series of migrations often prompted by Roman actions or other external pressures. In many cases, whole peoples, including women, children, and the elderly, were on the move, often fleeing something even worse behind them. One of the major catalysts for this increased movement was the arrival of the Huns in Eastern Europe. These were a nomadic people from Central Asia, known for their fearsome archers and rapid movement on horseback. As the Huns pushed westward, they displaced the tribes already living there, creating a domino effect. And one of the largest groups pushed towards the Roman border were the Goths. Imagine being a Goth in the late 4th century. You're living north of the Danube River, minding your own business, perhaps trading with the Romans. Suddenly terrifying warriors on horseback, the Huns appear from the east, driving you from your lands. Your leaders decide the safest option is to cross the Danube and seek refuge within the Roman Empire. You approach the Roman border officials, pleading to be led in promising loyalty, and soldiers in exchange for safety and land. This is where Roman mismanagement turned a potential integration into a disaster. The Roman officials tasked with managing the crossing were corrupt and cruel. They extorted the Goths, demanded exorbitant prices for food, and mistreated them terribly. This treatment of desperate refugees was, to put it mildly, not great Roman policy. It's like inviting someone into your house because they're fleeing a storm, and then immediately stealing their wallet and making them sleep in the rain in your backyard. Unsurprisingly, the Goths pushed to the brink by starvation, and mistreatment eventually revolted against their Roman overlords. This wasn't just a small skirmish. The Goths, now inside Roman territory, and justly enraged, formed a formidable army. The Emperor Valens, ruling the Eastern Roman Empire at the time, gathered his forces to crush them. The two armies met near the city of Adrianople in 378 AD. The result was a catastrophic defeat for the Romans. The Goths won a decisive victory, and Emperor Valens was killed in the battle, a mainstream historical fact that sent shockwaves throughout the empire. It was clear proof that the legions were not invincible, and that the barbarians were not just disorganized raiders, but could field powerful armies capable of defeating the empire's best forces. The borders were no longer a secure line. They were becoming increasingly permeable, and the internal weaknesses of Rome were about to be severely tested by the pressures from without. So, the borders are under pressure. The Roman army, though still formidable, is strained, and the empire's internal issues mean it's less able to project strength or bounce back from defeats like Adrianople. The Goths, after their victory, didn't just vanish. They continued to move around within the empire's sphere, sometimes fighting, sometimes negotiating, always a disruptive force. And their leader Alaric was ambitious. He wasn't just looking for a place for his people to settle. He wanted recognition, a place in the Roman system, and resources. When negotiations broke down, his gaze turned towards the ultimate prize, the symbolic heart of the vast empire, the city of Rome itself. Now the city of Rome, in the early 5th century AD, wasn't always where the emperor lived anymore. The Western Roman emperor's court was often in Ravenna, a city with better defenses. But Rome was still Rome, the eternal city, the place with the Colosseum, the Forum, the Pantheon, the palaces of the senatorial elite, and hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. It hadn't been successfully breached by a foreign enemy in nearly 800 years. The idea of barbarian troops marching through the Forum felt utterly impossible, like imagining elephants tap dancing on the moon. The citizens felt secure, perhaps complacently so, behind their ancient walls. But Alaric marched his Visigothic army down into Italy, and in 408 AD laid siege to Rome. Imagine being inside the city during that time. The initial shock, the disbelief that this could be happening here in Rome. The gates are shut, the walls are manned, but the enemy isn't trying to break in yet. They're waiting. They're cutting off the food supply lines. Supplies inside the city dwindle. Hunger becomes a real, gnawing fear. You hear rumors, see the anxiety on people's faces. The mighty city that imports grain from Africa is suddenly starving. It's a psychological weapon as much as a military one. Alaric demanded a massive ransom to lift the siege, which the Romans eventually paid, a staggering amount of gold, silver, silk, and spices. He lifted the siege, but this was just a temporary reprieve. Alaric would lay siege to Rome 2 more times over the next couple of years, each time negotiating for terms, each time increasing the pressure. The central government in Ravenna, under Emperor Honorius, was weak and indecisive, constantly underestimating Alaric or double-crossing him. It was a masterclass in poor diplomacy, like poking a very large, very armed bear with a stick made of red tape. Finally, in August of 410 AD, Alaric and his Visigoths were at the gates again for the 3rd time. This time, they weren't just demanding ransom. The precise details of how they got in are debated. Historians still argue whether the Salarian Gate was opened by sympathetic residents, perhaps slaves, hoping for freedom, or forced by the Goths after a breach elsewhere. The most common story involves the Salarian Gate being opened in the dead of night. Imagine you are asleep in your Roman home. Suddenly, you are jolted awake by screams, the clang of metal, the terrifying sound of many heavy boots running in the streets. The city's gates have been opened. The Visigoths are inside. Panic explodes. You hear the sounds of looting of doors being broken down. There's smoke in the air. You might see torches flickering through your window or hear the shouts of unfamiliar languages. It's not an organized battle in the streets. It's chaos, fear, and the sudden brutal realization that your world has just been turned inside out. The city that was supposed to be eternal is vulnerable. For 3 days, the Visigoths were in Rome. They looted treasure, including wealth from temples and the homes of the rich. While there was violence and destruction, it's a quirky tidbit that Alaric's sack of Rome in 410 AD was relatively restrained compared to what could have happened or what would happen in later sacks. They didn't raze the entire city, and many accounts suggest they showed some level of respect towards churches and religious sanctuaries, particularly St. Peter's Basilica. It wasn't the total annihilation of Troy. It was a plundering, a humiliation, but not complete destruction. Still, for the people living through it, it was a terrifying ordeal, the world as they knew it ending. The mainstream historical fact is undeniable. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, sacked the city of Rome in 410 AD. The symbolic impact of this event was immense. St. Augustine, a philosopher living at the time, felt compelled to write his monumental work, City of God, partly in response to pagan Romans, who blamed the sack on the city, abandoning the old gods for Christianity. The news echoed across the empire and beyond. Rome had fallen. Not the empire yet, but the city itself, the symbol of its power and invincibility. It was a psychological shock from which the Western Roman Empire would never fully recover. The cracks were showing, the external pressures were mounting, and the seemingly eternal city had just proven it was not in fact eternal. But as we'll see, 410 AD wasn't the last time Rome would face the terrifying reality of invaders within its walls. Rome had been sacked. The shock of 410 AD of Alaric and his Goths marching through the Forum echoed throughout the known world. The city wasn't entirely destroyed. No, it slowly picked itself up, rebuilt, and life went on. But the psychological blow was immense. The eternal city had proven to be very much temporal, and the troubles didn't end there. The Western Roman Empire, already weakened by internal strife and external pressures, continued its long, slow fade. The decades after 410 AD were a mess of shifting alliances, further migrations, and a steady loss of territory. Various groups, Vandals, Franks, Burgundians, Angles, Saxons, and others, carved out kingdoms within the old Roman borders. The Vandals, for instance, crossed into North Africa, Rome's breadbasket, and established a powerful kingdom there, even building a navy that challenged Roman control of the sea. Imagine trying to feed your massive city when the guys who control the grain supply are now your enemies and pretty good at sinking your ships. And the city of Rome itself would face the nightmare of invasion again. In 455 AD, just 45 years after Alaric, the Vandals sailed across from North Africa, entered Rome, this time possibly invited in by someone with a grievance, or just forcing their way, and proceeded to sack the city again. While perhaps less violent than Alaric's entry, the Vandal sack was reportedly more thorough in terms of looting. They stripped temples, palaces and public buildings of anything valuable. Gold, silver statues, even bronze roof tiles from temples. It was this thoroughness, this systematic plundering and destruction of property that some believe contributed to the modern meaning of the word vandalism. Yes, you can thank the Vandals for giving us the term for mindlessly destroying stuff, which is a quirky little linguistic legacy of their visit. Throughout this period, the actual power within the Western Roman Empire became increasingly fragmented. The emperors themselves were often weak figures, sometimes even children, who were controlled by powerful generals. And these generals were often men of barbarian origin, Goths, Vandals, Franks, etc. They commanded the Roman army's made and unmade emperors and held the real power. It's like the security guards taking over the company and putting a series of increasingly bewildered interns in the CEO's chair. Imagine the awkward staff meetings. The territory directly controlled by the Western Roman Emperor shrank dramatically. By the 460s and 470s, the emperor in Ravenna often held sway over little more than Italy itself, and even that was contested. The other parts of the old Western Empire, Britain, Gaul, Spain, North Africa, were effectively ruled by new kingdoms established by the migrating peoples. The traditional date for the fall of the Western Roman Empire is 476 AD. The emperor at the time was a young man named Romulus Augustulus. His name is almost a historical footnote, a poignant, slightly tragic echo of Rome's legendary founder Romulus and its first emperor Augustus. He wasn't a powerful figure, more of a puppet. The real power behind the throne was his father Orestes. However, Orestes eventually fell out with his troops, who were largely composed of Germanic warriors demanding land in Italy. Their leader was Odoacer, a Germanic general sometimes called a king. In 476 AD, Odoacer defeated Orestes, marched on Ravenna, and faced the young emperor Romulus Augustulus. Instead of killing him, Odoacer simply deposed him, sending him into exile. Odoacer then sent the imperial regalia, the symbols of Western Roman imperial power, back to the Eastern Roman emperor in Constantinople. The mainstream historical fact is clear: the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Odoacer in 476 AD. Was this the fall? Historians still argue whether 476 AD represents a definitive fall or just a continuation of political shifts and a convenient marker in a long process of transformation. After all, Odoacer ruled Italy? Yes, but he initially ruled ostensibly as a representative of the Eastern Emperor. The Roman legal system and culture didn't vanish overnight. But practically speaking, there was no longer an emperor in the West ruling from Rome or Ravenna. The old Western Roman Empire as a unified political entity was gone. It hadn't been conquered in a single decisive battle like Troy. It had slowly, painfully fragmented and faded away under the weight of its own problems and the relentless pressure from migrating peoples. The stage was set for a new era in Western Europe, one of smaller kingdoms built on the ruins of the old empire. But the story of Rome, in a sense, wasn't entirely over. The eastern part of the empire, with its capital in a city built to be even more secure than Rome, would continue the Roman legacy for another 1,000 years. While the Western Roman Empire was busy dealing with internal decay, civil wars, and a steady stream of migrating peoples who eventually became its neighbors, something important had happened in the East. Back in the early 4th century AD, long before Alaric or the Vandals made their unwelcome visits to Rome, a different kind of change was underway, initiated by one of Rome's most consequential emperors, Constantine the Great. This is the guy who legalized Christianity, and perhaps even more significantly for our story, decided to move the capital of the Roman Empire. Why move the capital? Historians still argue whether Constantine's primary motivation for founding Constantinople was strategic advantage, a desire for a Christian capital free from Rome's pagan past, or perhaps a combination of factors. Whatever the reason, he chose a location that was frankly a real estate agent's dream in the ancient world. He didn't pick some random spot. He chose the site of an ancient Greek city called Byzantium, perched on a peninsula right where the Bosporus Strait meets the Sea of Marmara. Imagine this location. To the north is the Black Sea, to the south, the Sea of Marmara and the Aegean leading to the Mediterranean. The city sits on a triangular peninsula with water on two sides, the Sea of Marmara and the Golden Horn, a natural harbor, and only one side facing land. This geographical feature is a key mainstream fact about Constantinople's strength. Its strategic location controlled the vital Bosporus Strait, the narrow waterway connecting the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, essentially acting as a toll booth for all sea traffic between the two. Controlling this strait meant controlling trade and naval movement between two massive bodies of water, giving the city immense economic and military power. Constantine decided this was where his new capital would be. He massively expanded the existing city of Byzantium, pouring resources into building forums, palaces, churches, lots of churches, reflecting his new religious outlook and public works. He officially dedicated the city in 330 AD, renaming it Nova Roma New Rome, though it quickly became known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. He intended it to be just as grand, just as important as old Rome, importing art and treasures from across the empire to adorn it. It was like a massive, ancient urban development project, complete with all the finest amenities the empire could offer. Moving a whole capital city. Yeah, that sounds like a logistical headache of epic proportions, even without worrying about lead pipes and barbarian invasions. Constantine built walls to protect his new city, running across the landward side of the peninsula. These were good walls for their time, but the city grew rapidly, expanding beyond his original fortifications. The real stars of the show, the walls that would become legendary, were built later in the 5th century AD during the reign of Emperor Theodosius II. These are the famous Theodosian walls. Imagine a defensive system so formidable it basically laughs in the face of incoming armies. The Theodosian walls weren't just one wall. They were a triple layer of fortifications. First, there was a moat, about 60 feet wide and 20 feet deep, often filled with water. Behind that was a low outer wall, the Protichisma, with a patrol path between it and the moat. Behind the outer wall was a terrace, allowing defenders to rain projectiles down on attackers struggling in the moat or at the first wall. Then came the Mesa Tychos, the inner wall. This was the main event, a massive wall around 30 feet high, studded with nearly 100 towering rectangular forts, or watchtowers, each one a strong point capable of defending the sections of wall between them. And behind that was another terrace, and then the main inner wall, the Great Wall Megatekos, standing even taller, around 40 feet high, with even more massive square or octagonal towers, some reaching 60 feet or more. These towers were strategically placed to provide overlapping fields of fire. Getting past one wall was hard. Getting past 3-layered defenses under constant fire from archers, slingers, and stone throwers in the towers was nigh impossible. The landward side was thus incredibly well protected. The sea walls, while also present, were less elaborate as the Byzantine navy controlled the seas for much of the empire's history, and the Golden Horn could be easily blocked by a massive chain. This city was built to be defended, a fortress on a peninsula. It stood as a beacon of the Roman legacy in the east, even as the west crumbled. While Rome was being sacked and emperors were being deposed, Constantinople stood strong, thanks in large part to its incredibly smart location and some truly epic construction work. It was ready to face centuries of sieges challenges that would test those magnificent walls again and again. For 1,000 years, give or take, Constantinople stood, while Rome in the west crumbled while emperors came and went, while kingdoms rose and fell around it. The city of Constantine, protected by its location, and most famously by those incredible Theodosian walls, endured. It faced siege after siege, Avars, Persians, Arabs, Vikings, Bulgars, Rus, wave after wave of attackers trying to breach those legendary defenses, and time after time the walls held. The city became a symbol of resilience, the impregnable fortress of the East, a place where the Roman legacy, albeit in a Greek-speaking Eastern Christian form, continued to shine. But empires shift, powers rise, and technology changes the game. In the 14th and 15th centuries, a new power was growing rapidly in Anatolia, the very land where Troy once stood the Ottoman Turks. They were a formidable, ambitious force, steadily conquering the lands around the dwindling Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, once the heart of a vast territory, was reduced to little more than a city-state surrounded by Ottoman territory. It was a rich strategic prize, the last bastion of the old order in the region, and the Ottomans wanted it. Their leader, in the mid-15th century, was Sultan Mehmed II, often called the Conqueror. He was young, brilliant, and utterly determined to take Constantinople. He saw it not just as a strategic necessity to consolidate his growing empire, but as a glorious historical achievement, the capture of the world's most famous city. He prepared meticulously, building a fortress on the European side of the Bosporus to control the strait, and crucially gathering the most advanced military technology of the era gunpowder cannons. Now cannons had been around for a while, but they were often small and unreliable. Mehmed II, however, commissioned enormous ones. He hired a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who specialized in casting large bronze artillery. Imagine the sheer scale of these things. The most famous was a colossal bombarding cannon, sometimes called the Basilica, reportedly capable of firing stone balls weighing over 1,000 pounds. Moving and aiming these things was a monumental task, requiring hundreds of men and oxen, but their destructive potential against stone fortifications was unprecedented. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Ottoman Turks used large cannons, including supersized ones, to breach the Theodosian walls during the 1453 siege, changing siege warfare forever. Those walls, built to withstand conventional siege engines and manpower, were about to face something entirely new. The siege began in April 1453. You perhaps one of the city's dwindling defenders, a Byzantine soldier, a Venetian or Genoese mercenary, even just a citizen helping out, are bracing for the inevitable. The Ottoman army is vast, tens of thousands strong, surrounding the landward walls. The bombardments begin. The noise must have been deafening, terrifying. The ground shakes with the impact of the massive stone balls smashing against the stone, sending chips and dust flying. The walls, which had stood for 1,000 years, were finally taking serious damage. Breaches would appear, and during the night, Under the constant threat of Ottoman attacks, the defenders would desperately try to repair them with timber rubble and anything they could find. It was a constant, exhausting struggle. The Ottomans attacked by sea too, but the Byzantines had placed a heavy chain across the mouth of the Golden Horn, preventing the Ottoman fleet from entering the harbor and attacking the less fortified sea walls. Mehmed's response, another display of audacious engineering. It's a quirky tidbit that the Ottomans, unable to break the chain directly, simply built a slipway over the hills behind the city and, using greased logs and manpower, dragged dozens of their ships overland from the Bosporus into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain entirely. Imagine waking up one morning and seeing enemy ships sailing downhill into your harbor. It was a shocking feat that demoralized the defenders and forced them to stretch their limited manpower even thinner. The siege lasted for 7 weeks. The defenders fought with incredible courage, led by the last Byzantine emperor Constantine V, Palaiologos. They repelled multiple assaults, repaired breaches, and sank some Ottoman ships, but they were simply outnumbered and outgunned. The relentless cannon fire eventually created a crucial breach in the outer wall and severely weakened the inner wall near the Lycus Valley, a section known as the Mesoteikion. In the early hours of May 29, 1453, the final assault began. Waves of Ottoman troops surged forward. The fighting was desperate and brutal in the pre-dawn darkness. The defenders fought valiantly, but eventually the sheer weight of numbers and the breaches in the walls proved too much. A small postern gate possibly left ajar, though historians still argue whether this Kursk Porta-gate story is true or legend, or the main breaches, finally overwhelmed, allowed the first Ottoman soldiers to gain a firm foothold inside the walls. Once inside, the defense collapsed. The city fell. The last Roman emperor, Constantine V, is said to have died fighting alongside his men in the final desperate struggle. Historians still argue whether the emperor died fighting in the final breach or in another part of the city, his body never definitively identified. The city that had been the heart of the Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years, the inheritor of Rome's mantle, was conquered. It was a moment that shook Europe, marking for many the end of the Middle Ages. The seemingly impregnable walls had finally been overcome, not just by force, but by new technology that rendered the old defenses obsolete. Constantinople, the city that wouldn't fall for 1,000 years, finally did. And so our journey through these stories of tricks, falls, and forgotten glory comes to a close. From the cunning deception that brought down the mighty walls of Troy, to the slow grinding decline and repeated humiliation that saw the Western Roman Empire fade away, to the 1,000-year endurance and final explosive fall of the legendary walls of Constantinople. These weren't just random events. They were moments that shifted the course of history, illustrating how human ingenuity, pride, vulnerability, and the relentless march of time and technology can change the world in profound ways. Now, as the echoes of ancient sieges and fallen empires fade into the quiet of the night, you can let your mind drift away from the dust of Troy, the marble of Rome, and the stones of Constantinople. The weight of history is heavy, but tonight you can let it settle softly. Feel the comfort of your bed, the gentle rhythm of your breath. The walls of your own world are secure tonight, protected from the tricks and tumbles of the past. There's nothing left to do but relax, unwind, and allow yourself to sink into peaceful slumber. May your dreams be calm, and your night restful. Sweet dreams.